what do you know? It is November somehow, which means it is my birthday month. And it also means that despite the fact that last week, as of this recording, I went through the 10 books, the 10 physical books I'm hoping to get through before the end of the year, that we have over 20 more books to add to that tentative TBR. I mean, I'm not going to get through all of these by the end of the year because I have not gotten through any of our monthly anticipated by the end of the year, or will get through all of any of our monthly anticipated by the end of the year. But it's nice to know that we have options, and it's nice to know what those options are. And there are still a lot of good books coming out in November, especially on November 4th, the first New Book Tuesday of the month, which also happens to be my birthday. I would wear my It's My Birthday headband, but sadly, I broke it. So we will not be doing that. But I like to consider the first new release Tuesday of this month as a gift to me personally because of all the new great releases coming out that day. But before we dive in, hi, my name is Melody, and we talk about books and book adjacent things on this channel, including every month. Ideally, in a perfect world, we are talking about a lot of the books that I personally have on my radar that are coming out for the month so that we can get them on our radar, get excited about them, get library holds on, get pre-orders in, or just have a general awareness of them so that we can hopefully pick them up and read them and talk about them more. As I always say though, I am not going to talk about every book, so if there are things you are excited about, go ahead and leave those below as well so we can continue to get excited about books and get the word out about books that are coming out. But if that sounds of interest to you, in addition to all of the other bookish chatter that goes on here, I would love for you to like and subscribe and hang out a little bit longer. And if you need some extra incentive to like, remember, this week is my birthday, and likes and comments and subscribes and all that jazz, and just you being here and watching really helps me. And in this month of gratitude and in this month of reflection for me personally, because that's just what I do around my birthday, I do want to just emphasize how much I appreciate that and appreciate all of you who are here and have been here for the last 6 years or whatever duration, even if it's just been a week or two. I really, really appreciate you being here because I know that time is limited and the world is on fire. So I'm grateful that you are here and spending any time with me amidst all of that. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive in to the new releases of November 4th, the best day of the year, if I do say so myself. Let's get into the new books, starting with Where There's Room for Us by Hayley Kiyoko, who I know is a musical artist that I don't listen to very regularly, who I don't think this is her first book. And I do have suspicion, I don't want to begrudge or besmirch anyone's name, but anytime I see a celebrity that kind of branches out into the book world in fiction in particular, I do have questions about whether a ghostwriter was involved. But again, I don't know her work well enough to be making that. So again, not trying to besmirch anyone's name. What I'm really excited about is the concept of this book, because it's a historical romance, essentially, a young adult Victorian historical romance taking place in an alternate Victorian England where queer identities are just a natural, accepted part of that world. And so we have a young woman whose brother has recently inherited an estate, thrusting her into the kind of social season and that world of London. And in this, she comes across one of the kind of stars of the social season and the big socialites of the season, and has a flirtation with her that develops despite the fact that this young woman has kind of been living and prepping her entire life to become a wife and a mother, and what her future potentially is looking like. And so this feels very reminiscent to me of a lot of the young adult I loved as a young adult, the kind of historical Gossip Girl-esque fiction with series mostly like Lux and those kind of spin-off series, but this is also very much the kind of historical romance primer I would have been attracted to at that time, and so feels like a way into and to continue building and getting new generations of historical romance readers when we need them the most. And it's definitely not the only young adult book or series that has come out recently that is doing this. Most top of mind, I would think of something like The Davenports, definitely prime for that. Also has recently been optioned for a television show, which is very, very exciting. I need to get to the sequel, but definitely will want to talk about that if it comes out, and we'll be very excited to see that period of Chicago and that particular world of Chicago historically built out for the screen. So very exciting. But yeah, very excited for this. It also kind of reminds me of things potentially, maybe without the fantastical elements, but things like Freya Marsk, but just kind of those alternate Victorian or Regency, depending on the series, kind of books that we've seen coming out in the adult landscape, but also have seen come out over the years. We have these series that kind of live in that realm. So very excited to see how this positions itself against the other work in that vein. Next, another young adult, and the usual reminder that I have a computer in front of me. If you see me looking down, I don't have this all just by memory, believe it or not, but Deadly Ever After by Brittany Johnson, which I have seen floating around for a little bit now, and I was sure that this was not a debut, but it looks like this may be a debut, that this author was previously in an anthology, but this is her standalone debut. So that's very exciting because this is a kind of fairy tale reimagining where two princesses have died and they are transported to a kind of forest liminal space where they are presented with a quest and a challenge that basically, if they have true love's kiss, they will be resurrected in whatever way. However, the catch is if they kiss someone and it is not true love, they're dead. And this, of course, sounds right up my alley. You've got these fairy tale underpinnings, but kind of in conversation with it and challenging it. You have two young women who are grappling with the kind of gender roles and life roles that they have been assigned and the way they are perceived in their worlds and what that means for them, and then popping them in to this liminal space. And my favorite, or one of my favorite iterations of a liminal space, a forest, as well as having this romantic element. Very, very intrigued by this one and definitely excited to see what we get here. Next we have How About Now by Kate Baer, which is a poetry collection that seems to be just grappling with the time of life, growing older, kind of empty nesting or sending your kids out into the world. So that particular time in and stage of life, which I haven't spent a whole lot of time with in my fiction and in my poetry and my kind of grapplings, just because that hasn't been the time of my life I'm in. But I am starting to look at it. I mean, I do not have children, so I am not facing down sending my children into the world, but I am watching people I grew up with as their children get older and just kind of understanding as I'm getting older, again, hey, it's my birthday, and recognizing these different stages of life and how they are much closer to me than they once were. And I am much more interested in exploring and talking about these later stages of life as a woman that aren't as talked about, again, with the caveat that I have not been seeking them out either previously. I mean, I have been a little bit more now, but I was kind of very short-sighted into my own experience, right? So now kind of trying to bridge and widen and broaden out of that experience. And so I think that this is a great opportunity to look at that. And I have read her, or one of her previous collections, And Yet, which was also kind of similarly focused. So I don't really have a whole lot of insight into her consistently as a poet, but again, poetry is kind of my weakest point within literary landscapes in terms of analysis, so that is what it is as well. Next we have a new Marissa Meyer, who was once a darling of the young adult world, and I haven't heard a whole lot from recently. This is the author of the Cinder series, and then Heartless, I think, was a duology. I read Heartless and I didn't love it, but I'm very interested in where Meyer's work is going next. And with this book, The House Saphir, it seems to be a Bluebeard retelling, the second of which I've encountered this year, if we're counting, but not too bold, the novella by Hashe Pueo, which if you have not read, you definitely need to read. So this is being pitched as a kind of romantasy murder mystery about a young woman who can see ghosts, but doesn't have the kind of magical abilities that many thinks she does. And she is a tour guide, kind of, I think, in the estate, or the historic estate, kind of giving tours about this figure who killed 3 of his wives a century ago. And because of this, Mallory catches the attention of Armand, who is the heir essentially to this man's estate, and he offers her a large sum of money to come rid the country estate, I assume, since it seems like she's giving tours of the estate of some kind, of this man's ghost. However, the blurb also mentions that he has kind of clocked her or determined that she is a mark of some kind, which implies to me a certain level of duplicity in intention there. And then she gets to this estate, which she is kind of assuming is going to be a kind of a lark and a vacation of sorts, only for someone on this estate to wind up dead and for there to be a murder mystery element as well. I am, of course, most intrigued by this for the potential of ghosts, but also I'm really interested as kind of trends have moved in fantasy and retellings, and Meyer is so known for her retellings, to see how her storytelling has morphed with the current market, and not in a way where like that's a judgmental kind of analysis or thought, but I'm just interested to see how it translates. Then we have the newest from the author of My Sister the Serial Killer, Cursed Daughters by Winkin Braithwaite. And this is following a young woman who lives in kind of an intergenerational home in Lagos, and there is this concept or this idea that they have, or the women of the family have been cursed to never have love, essentially. But on top of that, this young woman was born on the day or shortly after her cousin passed away, and it is widely believed in her family that she is the reincarnation, essentially, of said cousin. And on top of that, that it is believed that she will have the same fate of this cousin. But when she saves a handsome young man from drowning and falls in love, she has a reason to try to avoid this fate and starts seeking guidance and aid from some of the more spiritual corners of Lagos. So I am excited for like the same voice that we got in My Sister the Serial Killer, but also maybe some of these echoes of the idea of spirits and the way spirits were handled, especially the spirits of Lagos in Vagabonds. So very, very interested to see how this one plays out. And then we have the start of a new dystopian sci-fi series from Chloe Gong, Coldwire. I am ashamed to admit that I still have not read Chloe Gong. I need to fix that. I am tempted to fix it with this one because it is giving me kind of echoes of like the sci-fi dystopias from my youth that I loved, a la like Uglies, movie aside, but also something like the Warcross duology from Marie Lu that came out probably close to a decade ago now, and I don't want to think about that, but this is kind of exploring the idea of an alternate reality and the kind of ways that people have moved to alternate realities and digital realities, and what the politics of that are and the kind of society of that. So, very interested. There's of course a lot more going on here with like people being given missions and double crosses and secret agents and things of that nature, but the world building here sounds really fascinating as well. And I'm saying this again as someone who doesn't technically or typically like dystopias, but I am interested in the more kind of like sci-fi versions of them sometimes, because there is a little bit more fun world to play in amidst all of the horrors. I don't know, we'll see, but let me know if you think that I should start somewhere else with Chloe Gong, but very interested in this one. Then we have not only a new Akweke Emezi book, despite the fact that I am behind on my Akweke Emezi, but we have a new romantasy from Akweke Emezi, or at least that's how it's being kind of pitched, marketed, which makes sense in the current landscape. I'm getting very strong like paranormal romance vibes from this, which is even more exciting for me. Like that era of paranormal romance, especially in the mid 2000s, because we've got this idea, or it seems to be invoking this idea of kind of like devils and non-humans in the real world, whatever that means, and like this kind of like more epic scale within a kind of secluded South setting at the start of this. So it may be the best of both worlds, and honestly the best of all 3 worlds. We've got the romantasy audience, the kind of current market. We've got those of us who have been reading and dabbling and experiencing these stories for longer, and we have the kind of crossover there with the paranormal romance. And of course, every reader could fall into any of these categories at any time. And then also we have just the fact that it's Akwaeke Emezi, and they always deliver a fascinating world and story. So again, I'm behind on a lot of their new releases, but I definitely think I will prioritize this one. And then we have a new historical romance from Madeline Rue, These Violet Delights, which is interesting because I was like, I recognize this name, but I know I haven't read any historical romance by her. So I looked her up on Goodreads, and it looks like her most popular series is the young adult Asylum series, which I definitely recognize the covers of, but haven't read myself. And so it looks like she has a lot of like horror and sci-fi and fantasy, but this may be her first or second-ish historical romance, which is interesting to me within the context of the current market of historical romance. So I'm very interested in that. And this seems to kind of live in the rom-com side of things, though, I mean, I'm basing that on the cover, to be fair. And the cover stories right now in historical romance aren't a perfect system, but this seems to be following a woman, an artist who has a kind of scandal breakout upon her debut as an artist, where she gets some critiques for her work, which is fine. She can handle that. She is a professional. However, then an affair with her art instructor is revealed, and she flees to her cousin's country estate to kind of get over her humiliation and to also, I think, build a relationship with a new mentor or get a new artistic mentor and continue her work. But come to find out, the neighbor of this estate that has a long-standing feud with her family is one of the critics or the main critics of her artistic debut. And so there is already bad blood in addition to the bad blood that seemingly is running between these families. Meanwhile, her cousin is potentially involved with the younger brother of said estate. Meanwhile, Alistair, the said critic who has come back to his country estate after a fire has tragically killed his father, so he has to kind of take control of the estate, and now he's dealing with his younger brother, as well as there is seemingly an arson subplot in this book where both of these two have to try and get to the bottom of it together, in addition to trying to keep these two apart. Though, of course, we know they will grow closer in the meantime. It's giving me echoes of a couple of Sarah MacLean's I really love, just because those are the most top of mind references. So I'm just very interested to see what this is and what or how this author writes within historical romance and what that transition is. Also with the caveat that I don't know her work well enough to know how long she's been in historical romance, and that there is always the possibility that she has been writing more extensively in historical romance under a pen name I'm not aware of. Next we have Gilded and Vengeance by Lyssa Smith, which is a magical reimagining of the Gilded Age and a young woman who is baselessly accused of some crime, and though she's a socialite, she's kind of whisked away, she disappears, but what no one knows is that she has been imprisoned for this perceived crime until her cell is kind of blown apart by another favorite of society, Jack, who has been imprisoned for a crime he says he doesn't commit, and he breaks her out as well under the condition that she helps him get vengeance on society, essentially. And so they re-enter society under these presumed or new identities and kind of become the toast of the town, so to speak. So a little bit of Count of Monte Cristo vibes there. But things, of course, become more complicated in balancing these new identities and secrets and tracking down their enemies with developing feelings. This feels like it will probably have a little bit of suspension of disbelief, but in a fun way. And I like the vaguely historical setting of it and the magic of it. I like a Gilded Age setting because I like a Gilded Age in theory, not in contemporary reality. And I'm just interested to kind of see the escapism of it. And so I'm interested in the magic and the escapism, even if I do fear that there probably will be some political parallels. And not fear in a bad way, to be clear. The world is just a lot right now, as I'm sure you're all aware, because if nothing else, I've mentioned it already in this video. Next we have Honeymoon Stage by Margot Elliott, who is Julia Fine writing under a new pen name. And she is presumably writing under this new pen name because this book is a real deviation in terms of the focus of her work, in that this is following a producer from a hit reality show in the 2000s as she is set to marry into one of these reality show dynasties, and kind of looking back on what happened at the breakdown of this show she was a producer on. And I've seen that she was heavily influenced by things like Newlyweds. And so it really is going to be that kind of nostalgic reality TV era. Nostalgia to whatever degree, though we've obviously been critiquing a lot in the modern moment, and I'm sure that this will have a lot of that critique as well. And I'm very interested to see what Margot Elliott, Julia Fine, brings to this conversation. I think the reason she's using a pen name, I haven't heard her speak on it super directly, but is part of this shift in focus. And also, like, one of the things that I love so much about her work under Julia Fine is this kind of element of the odd to things, not full supernatural, but there is that kind of tension and danger and oddity to her writing and those explorations. And I forget how I framed the question to her at her last release in relation to how she conceives of that, but I am assuming and getting from the blurb that this is a much more kind of straightforward, maybe not narratively in the way that she experiments with structure and form, but I don't get the sense that it's going to have those elements of the odd, which I do think tonally is different enough to be writing under a new name. And whatever, I don't mean this as a bad thing. I think that this appeals, or is more like traditionally commercially appealing, in the sense that Fine, again, I love her work, but writes much more niche fiction in a lot of ways that really works for a lot of readers like me, but isn't going to be the more broadly appealing either, especially like things like her debut, which I do need to revisit. And I'm sad because every time I see her at a signing, they never have her debut in stock. And I loved that book, and I'm interested to revisit it in light of a lot of her other work because I loved it so much. But even when I read it, I think my review was basically like, not everyone is going to like this book, but I loved it. So this feels like it's going to be much more in line with things like The Favorites, especially this year, in that kind of exploration of a really tawdry personal story with connections that us as readers can kind of make to the pop culture that shaped us, and be in conversation with that, and us in some ways as readers and as viewers as being complicit in the system and how, to whatever degree as well. So very interested in what we're going to get here. I am kind of sad because on release day, there is the inaugural Chicago Literary Society event for this book, which I believe was conceived of and created by Ashley Hasty over on Bookstagram, and is being put on in combination with Three Avenues Bookstore as the kind of bookstore sponsor for the event, and involves like a dinner and a conversation, like an intimate conversation. I'm very interested to see how it's going to go. I know when they did a kind of tease of the cover of their inaugural event, they were like, can you guess what book this is, or what book we're going to have at this first event? And I immediately DM'd and I was like, it is this one. So I'm really sad that I didn't buy tickets, but I'm sure it's going to be an excellent evening, and if you're in Chicago, something to keep your eye out for. Then we have a new anthology in celebration of Jane Austen's 250th birthday, Ladies in Waiting, Jane Austen's Unsung Characters, which, as a historical romance reader, the contributions I'm most excited for in this collection are from Diana Quincy, Sarah MacLean, and Eloisa James. But this is kind of taking some of Austen's lesser-known characters, or potentially descendants, according to the blurb, and imagining stories for them. So that's just a really fun concept. I'm interested to see an anthology of this nature and the kind of breadth of storytellers they've selected for this, and to envision what this is going to be. I will say, though I have read the entire Austen canon, some of the books I have not read since high school, so I do worry that some of the lesser known characters in this I won't recognize right away, so I will probably need to brush up and revisit. But I am particularly interested in the concept of a Caroline Bingley reimagining that is positioned or propositioned in the blurb. And yeah, it just looks like a fun celebration of Jane Austen's work and legacy. And then we have The Sacred Space Between by Callie Reid, which I am particularly interested in as it is blurbed for fans of Divine Rivals and A Study in Drowning. Both books I absolutely love. And this is following a saint who was exiled or secluded at 15 to preserve and control his memory magic. And 10 years later, he just wants to live a normal life outside of the purview of the abbey. So when an iconographer is sent to paint him, his goal is to just get rid of her as soon as possible. But then it becomes clear that she has the same kind of magic that he does, and that her paintings of the saints may be the key to overthrowing the abbey. Next we have Lightbreakers by Aja Gabel, who is the author of The Ensemble, which came out in 2018. I thought it was more recent than that, but it was 2018. And this seems to be a literary time travel exploration of things like grief and family for fans, potentially, since I haven't read it yet, of things like Immaculate Conception by Ling Ling Huang, in that we are following a woman and her husband is kind of haunted by the loss of a child that he had with his first ex-wife, and then he is presented with this opportunity to work with this institution that is playing with time travel. And so it's seemingly kind of exploring these ideas of time and consciousness and connection. And of course, we are immediately suspect with the idea of a billionaire interested in these ideas within the concept of this lab. So very interested to see how this tackles it. And in light to, it's been a long time since I've read The Ensemble, since it came out in 2018, but that kind of looked at the idea of connection, or was interested in the idea of connection as well, and looked at things across a longer period of time. So I'm very interested to see how she explores that idea of time within this book, and we have the potential for some really interesting structure there too, so interested to see if that is played with as well. And then finally for the 4th, it is the biggest release day of the month, which makes sense because we are inching closer to the end of the year and we're trying to slip in these titles under the wire, and so it's going to be a lot more concentrated early in the month, and we'll have some lighter release days sprinkled through the rest of November, and December will be more of a sprinkle, I'm sure, as well. But to kind of round out what I've got my eye on for November 4th, we have The Ivory City by Emily Bain Murphy, which seems to be a kind of murder historical mystery set at the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904. And it's following a couple of cousins, particularly cousin Grace, and they've been friends their entire life despite the fact that their families have much different social statuses after Grace's parents married for love. And so Lily invites Grace to the World's Fair, and then someone is murdered and Lily's brother is a suspect, and so Grace is trying to help solve this murder to absolve her cousin and save the reputation of their family. And this also puts her in contact with her cousin Oliver's friend Theodore, who may have some secrets of his own. This is being blurbed as for fans of Devil in the White City. I'm presuming, because it's not that hard to presume, because of the connection between the World's Fair and like a murder mystery element. Though as a person in Chicago, I am sad it is not the Chicago World's Fair. This does look like a really fun historical murder mystery, and maybe there is the promise for more if I know how to read my blurbs right, or maybe it is a red herring. In moving on to November 11th, I had to change my battery, and I realized we are potentially a little more cattywampus than I thought after thinking, or having thought, I had leveled my tripod. So we're just gonna move with it. This is why I dropped my TCOM major to a minor. Let's be real. The first book of November 11th is The Marriage Narrative by Claire Kahn, or at least the first book on my radar. I am very excited for this, for the potential of a contemporary marriage of convenience, which I know I've said once within the last calendar year already that didn't pay off in the way I hoped. But I have high hopes here because I've only read one Claire Kahn, and I think it was her young adult debut, but I remember really liking that book. And I remember that book helping me through a layoff. So that's a great sign. But this is following a woman who has like a plan of attack for marriage. She is no nonsense. She has on her dating profile that she just kind of wants to check the boxes, 30 days, be married, meet, date, move in together, get married, within 30 days. Her friends do not have high hopes for this plan. And I will admit, if I was her friend, I would be thinking the same. However, she lucks out in Jordan, whose family is part of an extremely popular reality TV show, and they have gotten him to agree to be in the cast. However, producers want him to get married for the plot and want him to get married to his ex-girlfriend. And so he thinks that Zinnia is a much superior option, which I'm willing to bet, just based on the blurb, that she probably is. There's probably a lot of emotional baggage with his ex-girlfriend. And so they enter into this arrangement all while playing besotted newlyweds on this reality TV show as the line between fiction and reality starts to blur. This looks like a lot of fun and is another entry. Looks like it's going to be a good month for reality TV show fans in terms of releases. Next we have To Kill a Queen by Amy McNee, which is following the heir to the criminal underworld, or at least a portion of the criminal underworld in Elizabethan England, and he's trying to get to the bottom of a thwarted assassination attempt on Elizabeth I in order to secure a different future for himself, which presumably will take him back to the criminal underbelly that he was raised in. This kind of makes me think of A Tip for the Hangman a little bit, even if Marlowe is not our detective here and we're not thwarting plots with Mary Queen of Scots, presumably at least at first glance. But I think this will be a really fun. I like historical mystery series. This is blurbed for fans of Tasha Alexander. I have not read all of her books. I think I've maybe read the first one. But also I feel like we don't get Elizabethan England as a setting that often in these series, and so I'm excited to see not a new historical setting, because Elizabethan England is popular, Tudor England is popular, but usually within court settings, and so I'm very excited to see a different kind of genre fiction kind of folded in to the world here, and to get to explore the world around Elizabethan England in a different capacity here. It also makes me think of a young adult series I really liked back in the day that followed a group of young women who were spies for Elizabeth I, so very interested in this one. Then we have Bound by Ali Hazelwood, and I'm going to be honest with you, I am not deep in my Ali Hazelwood lore in that I clearly read her very regularly, but I'm not as up to her or on her as I should be. I believe this is an audio exclusive. It has the Spotify logo on the cover, but I don't know that it is exclusive to Spotify, or if it's exclusive to Spotify in the same way that like an Audible exclusive would be. You know how I feel about an Audible exclusive, and I'm not 100% sure on how long this is either, like if it's a novella or if it's more of a novel length. I would posit, based on her output this year, that it's more novella, but I guess we'll find out. But this is following a young woman, Barrow, who uses her art history degree to get ahead on her bills via forgery, and she catches the eye of a professor who enlists her to forge a particular manuscript. And not just any manuscript, but a mysterious and ancient manuscript. So this is kind of folding in worlds that she's very familiar in, and we're, as readers, very familiar with her playing in terms of academia, but a different side of academia, and the potential to fold in some more of her paranormal kind of fantasy elements here as well. I don't know, I'm intrigued. And as someone who does a lot of my Ali Hazelwood on audio, actually this year was kind of an outlier in that I read both Deep End and Problematic Summer romance physically, but historically I've been doing a lot more of her recent releases on audio, including this year I did do Mate on audio, I did Bride on audio last year, but I really enjoy her audio production. So if this audio production is up to the standards of her other audio productions, I think this is going to be a great time. Then we have a new contemporary fiction kind of interrogating child stars, especially for this new generation, called Lucky Girl by Ali Hazelwood. And this is following a girl who made her name on a television show, a reality show for young dancers. So there are a couple of people in the public eye currently that this will probably evoke or invoke, and I do sometimes struggle with the kind of ethics of that. There have been books I've read in the past that were clearly inspired by very specific pop culture moments or families or ideas, and I do kind of play with that, especially as these children have been exploited in so many ways, going back even to the Sherry Frankie book from earlier this year. So I don't want to contribute to their stories being stolen from them more. However, there is also very interesting commentary and pertinent commentary to be had about these phenomenon. So this feels like it's probably, at least in the blurb, abstracting it enough that it doesn't feel like it's about any one specific individual. And it looks like there may be some elements of the odd or the absurd in terms of exploring these realms of childhood stardom. And I do think the idea of childhood stardom is broad enough and has been part of the zeitgeist and public conversation for long enough, decades upon decades. We are just kind of looking at this era where we thought we knew the dangers of it and are just finding new ways, or realizing we just found new ways to exploit children, essentially. But also this idea of fame and the cost of dreams and what those dreams are, or whatever. Interested to see what this has to say. Then, to return to the idea of 2000s paranormal romance for a brief second, we have a new book, The Reluctant Reaper by Mary Janice Davidson, who is very much a stalwart of the kind of paranormal rom-coms of that era for me as a reader. And this book looks very much in the vein of things like Undead and Unwed and Fish Out of Water. Was that the first book in that series? That was the Mermaid series. Plot twist, Fish Out of Water was the third book. Sleeping with the Fishes was the first book. It has been so long since I've read these books, and I will admit that I've had a slight one-sided grudge. I mean, it's always going to be one-sided against Mary Janice Davidson. Very low stakes. Very much like when you see those memes going around that's like, what's the pettiest reason you've stopped reading an author? This may be my answer. I had a bad taste in my mouth because I saw a blog post that she posted that was just railing against a cashier at Barnes & Noble that she felt had asked her about the membership too many times, and how annoying cashiers asking about the membership was. And I understand that. I do. I understand and agree that corporations, by and large, are ruining the shopping experience by forcing not even just the loyalty programs, whether they're paid or not, but like credit cards. I think that there are so many, when I talk about like the short-sightedness of corporations a lot and this inability to understand reality, this is really what I'm talking about. We're talking about like the death of in-person retail and puzzling and scratching our heads. And I think so much of it can be traced back to the fact that people don't want to be harassed into signing up for something at point of sale. And the fact that for a lot of these companies, that point of sale, that credit card sale, is where a lot of the money is coming from. She had a big blog post about it that I stumbled across. And at the time, I may or may not have been more actively involved in said memberships. I will neither confirm nor deny. However, it left me feeling some type of way because it felt very directed at the cashier rather than the corporation. I do think it discussed, it's been a long time since I've read this blog post. And again, this is very low stakes, right? This is a very much very petty reason. I just felt like there was too much of that animosity being directed at the point of sale person that was just doing their job. That blog post just left a bad taste in my mouth for a long time. However, these books have a very special place in my memory because they were just kind of these fun, frothy novels, these like rom-coms, paranormal rom-coms. I think they very much would have been, well, they would have been trade paperbacks today. Back in the day, they were mass market. And I'm very interested to see if that tone, I'm assuming it's the same kind of tone. The cover invokes the same tone to me. It invokes the same cover, which is also interesting to me that we have this cover that feels very much in line with a lot of her other covers tonally as well, which I do think match the books because they are more rom-com in nature. But here we are following the daughter of a reaper who does not have an interest in taking over the family business, but begrudgingly agrees to kind of fill in for a while her father is sick. And while she has no intention of becoming a reaper, she is able to see when people will die, including her best friend, who she has not pursued anything further with because of this ability, or at least that's a part of the reason. I don't know, it looks fun. If my memory serves me correctly, it will be fun, so we'll see. And then finally for the 11th, we have what I believe is the fiction debut. I know she has a collection of essays, which I still need to read. From award-winning playwright Kiera Alegria Juarez, we have The White Hot. And side note, jumping the gun a little bit here, but the audiobook is read by Daphne Rubin Vega. So I will be reading it that way probably. But this is supposedly, or according to the blurb, an exploration of a young mother who flees her child for like the course of a week. And it's her writing a letter to her child about this abandonment. It says 10 days in the blurb, but it also says later in the blurb from 10 days to 10 years. So I don't know if it extends or if we're kind of interrogating or looking at time differently here. I wouldn't be surprised if we're playing with the idea of time. The exploration of the online on stage that we get in Water by the Spoonful from her is one of my favorite kind of theatrical explorations of the digital transposed to the stage and that theatricality. So I have a lot of hopes and ideas that we could be playing with form in here in ways similar to how she plays with form and that theatricality on stage. I'm very interested to see how her voice translates from storytelling form to storytelling form, and am very intrigued by this. Okay, moving on to November 18th, we are starting with a new book from Cat Sebastian that I believe is an ebook only release, which feels like a deviation, and also, at least for Cat Sebastian, feels like a return, because her historical romances, at least when I started reading her, were digital exclusives, I believe out of Avon Impulse, that were then released into paperback as well. So this new book, which I've already pre-ordered on Kobo, so it seems to be more widely available, even if it is an ebook exclusive, is After Hours at Dooryard Books, and it seems to be, while still a historical romance, or at least romance adjacent, potentially, more in line with Sebastian's more recent mid-century historical romances, in that this takes place in 1968, which is a very tempestuous year historically in the American historical canon, and is following a rare bookseller and his small community, and the man Nathaniel who kind of drifts into their lives and the secrets he may have as well, even as he questions the safety of kind of establishing himself amidst this community of agitators and political radicals, making me believe that maybe there's something in his background there that would suggest he is of a like mind, but interested in the community aspect of this, especially as the kind of political tensions of the 60s really have kind of cycled back around and feel very current in the modern moment. And so I think the sense of community building that this seems to be exploring and playing with, and the comfort and protection of that amidst a really dangerous, larger world in whatever way, I think will really resonate. Again, interested to see that I don't think that I see Avon attached to this within the Goodreads listing, at least. Basically, I have a whole lot of question marks in my mind about what Avon is doing with their historical romance authors right now, and some grudges are developing, but again, I'm not going to get all the way into that in this video. We will circle back to that another time. The good news is we are getting a new Cat Sebastian historical of some length this year. Again, I don't know how long it's going to be. What I do know is that I will have it in my possession come midnight on the 18th. Next, for all of my fans of Greek myth retellings and reimaginings and kind of complications of some of the myths as we may know them, especially in terms of the villains in the myths that we may know them, as well as complicating the women of the Greek mythological canon, we have I, Medusa by Ayana Gray. The backstory seems to be pretty in line with what we know, though I am very interested in how Gray is going to interpret it and weave it into her storytelling here, but I am particularly intrigued in the blurb by the line, "Not as victim, but as vigilante," and with it the chance to write her own story as mortal, martyr, and myth. I think Medusa is a particularly interesting myth to complicate, and I'm excited to see what she does with it. Next we have I'll Find You Where the Timeline Ends by Kylie Lee Baker, which is a new time travel novel following the young descendant of a dragon god who has time travel abilities because of this lineage, and she is training to become part of a secret organization that protects the timeline, only to come across evidence of a sister that she doesn't have, and then encounter a rogue agent who complicates her idea of this agency she has been training to join and makes it so potentially she has to infiltrate them. I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm particularly interested in this for the idea of the time travel agency that protects time, because when I was a young adult, I was obsessed with a trilogy that many may not remember, but some will. The Guardians of Time trilogy by Marianne Curley. She released like a follow-up, like sequel, like a fourth book, I want to say 2020. And I hadn't read the original trilogy since I was a teenager. And I tried to jump into that book and I really struggled and I had to put it down because I wasn't, the writing wasn't resonating with me. And then I was like, oh, am I really remembering these books differently than they are? And honestly, I surely am. I was a much different reader when I was a teenager, but those books held a very special place in my heart, partially because I was just so enamored by the idea that they worked for this organization that protected time. And honestly, we didn't get to see but like maybe one mission, I feel like, from that original kind of impetus. But she wrote a couple of time travel books back in the day that I loved. I enjoy time travel. I'm very interested to see time travel in this context with this kind of espionage element and this fantasy element as well. So definitely have my eye on this one. And then we have I'll Make a Spectacle of You by Beatrice Winifred Eicher, which feels like it lives in kind of a dark academia realm. And this is following a graduate student at Brooksbury University, which within the world of the book is the oldest and most storied HBCU in the nation. And she has been encouraged to study some particular folklore in relation to her degree and her kind of special interests. And this particular folklore surrounds a beast that roams campus or the surrounding area, which puts her in contact or puts her on the radar, or them on the radar of her, which also leads her to the discovery of a secret society with potential ties to this beast called the Keepers. And when a student disappears, or students start disappearing, leads her to wonder if this secret society is really as gone as it first appeared. And finally, for the 18th, we have a translated work, The Ferryman and His Wife by Fruda Gritton and translated by Alison McCullough. This is recommended or blurbed for fans of George Saunders. I'm presuming for things like Lincoln and the Bardo, which we know is one of my favorite books. And I understand that connection, as this is seemingly following a ferryman who wakes up on November 18th, also the release date of this book, may I just remind you, and knows that he's going to die. And so he takes his last journey, and on this journey, echoes of the past are in his mind, and the dead begin to kind of emerge and join him on this trip. So the symbolism of it, this idea of moving into death, it's the imagery of that is really beautiful. I love the kind of idea of ghosts and echoes playing out in this way. It reminds me in some ways too of another book I absolutely love, Lillian Boxfish Takes a Walk, which is a woman walking through the streets of New York and recalling the breadth of her life toward the twilight of her life, and just the celebration of a life well lived, and getting to explore the fullness of that and the bittersweetness of it, the high points as well as the regrets, and just the full human experience in that way. And so it seems that this is him kind of re-examining, revisiting his life as he moves into this next adventure and is waiting for his wife to join him on the boat. And just the thought of that is going to make me cry right now. And finally, for November 25th, we only have 2 releases, but I'm very excited about both of them. First up, we have The Marriage Method by Mimi Matthews, which is the second in her Crinoline Academy series. I do still need to read the first book. I have it, I just haven't gotten to it yet. So ideally, maybe I can knock both of these off at once. I'm excited about this one as it is following a member of the Crinoline Academy, and she seemingly is kind of mixed up with a newspaperman who she is trying to protect the Academy's reputation from. And then one of his reporters is murdered, and they are caught in a compromising position that results in an arrangement that will allow them to investigate the death of this reporter while also dealing with some developing feelings. Sounds great. I'm in. Speaking then of sequels or second books in series that I haven't read the first one in yet, but I'm still very excited for, we have Second Chance Romance by Olivia Dade, which is the follow-up to At First Spite, and the second in the Harlot's Bay series, which, based on the blurb, may be the embodiment of Taylor Swift's Ruin the Friendship, because it follows two former best friends where nothing further ever happened, but there was something that kind of broke their friendship and they went their separate ways. But then the paper accidentally runs an obituary for him. How you can accidentally run an obituary, I do not know, but this pushes her to go home only to find out that he is not in fact dead, which is good news, but this gives them the opportunity to reconnect and maybe get that second chance. This is a really cute cover. However, Love Sweet Arrow, the romance bookstore out of Tinley Park, is doing a pre-order incentive for a jacket, or a dust jacket, wraparound jacket, based on the old clinch cover artwork for this book that looks fantastic. I believe that it's kind of inspired by the old Tender as the Storm cover for this book. And if you get a pre-order in by the 15th of November, I believe you will be getting that cover. They ran the same promotion for the first book, and I didn't end up pre-ordering because I was trying to be fiscally responsible and I regretted it. However, at Printers Row Lit Fest this year, they had extras for sale that they happened to have in stock, which would not be a guarantee. And I jumped on that so fast. I saw it and I went, and it is, one, gorgeous, but two, the quality, it's a much thicker, like it's a full wraparound. I didn't know like what quality print it would be, just because I had never ordered one before, but it was like it's a full thing. So this is book one, which is stunning, and book two looks fantastic as well. And I'm especially excited to see the body diversity for the male lead represented on a clinch cover for that book as well. So definitely need to get my pre-order in for that one so I don't have the same regrets, since this year's outcomes are not guaranteed. And that's November from where I'm sitting. So let me know what you were excited about, whether we've talked about it already today or not. I'm interested in what is still on your radar for releases through the end of the year. Thank you, as always, for hanging out and listening to mine. Another shameless plug to like and subscribe, especially with the added little push that it's my birthday, but read something good most importantly.